Hi, this is my review of Love and Sex in the Ninth World. Love and Sex in the Ninth World is a small supplement that helps you when you want to introduce themes of love, romance, and sex into your Numenera adventures and campaigns. Now, before we begin, I just want to give a little introduction as to why this caught my attention. Romance and sex has been a bit somewhat difficult to introduce in many role-playing games because they usually end up as very cringe-worthy in terms of adventure moments, or maybe sometimes they are quite funny, those scenes where the character is trying to hit on someone, or maybe if they are having sex. It also brings some laughs to the table. And sometimes when you're playing with dramatic players, it could turn out into a very serious experience, somewhat like Game of Thrones and such. So that romance and sex generally really does provide some opportunities for some more unusual role-playing experiences, but you have to know how to handle this. And I've seen other games and campaign settings and supplements that handle such themes in a very interesting way. So, for example, on the more serious side and the more the romantic side, I've seen that for example, in the Forgotten Realms, in the third edition of that setting, I believe it was Semnon, one of the black mages in the setting. He kind of had an alignment change because he found the love of his life. So that's an interesting way on how love improved things. But on the other hand, you have other more funny and positive examples. So, for example, in the Mutant Epoch role-playing game, you have an entire section in the website featuring sex relics and sex-related enemies. That is, enemies that are quite pornographic and are probably going to assault you in some way when they attack you, so they're quite scary. So there are many ways in which this can be handled, but I thought it would be interesting to see how such things were handled in Numenera. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is pretty good. It's well organized. It has some interesting illustrations, although I'm not entirely satisfied with the art. So, for example, let's take a look at the cover. You have a very strange scene, ambiguous, and not in a good way. I mean, you have this guy. I think it's a guy because he looks kind of effeminate, and he has this like unsure or strange face, like he's not even sure if he wants to romance this lady over here. And this woman is dressed in a very unusual way, like with feathers and very strange dress. But the thing is, if you're going to present love and sex in a weird way, which is the style of Numenera, I think it should still feel sexy, and I don't feel the sexiness coming from this cover. It really doesn't do anything for me. I wonder if it does anything for you. If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments, because this scene doesn't look neither romantic nor sexy. And the art throughout the book, well, they're just like small fragments. Some of them repeat themselves throughout the entire document. But I think the art could have been a lot better, and I wouldn't have mind if they added, for example, some sort of nakedness, because this is love and sex, so it's not like a little kid is going to read this. They should have gone a bit more wild with the art. At least that's my take on it. They could have had some really strange and nice illustrations and still communicating that sense of sexiness, because in science fiction and in fantasy, you see all these strange men and women, like, and people feel attracted to them. Like in Star Trek, they see, oh, that lady is has green skin or blue skin or whatever, has some weird alien appearance, but still looks like it has the body of a model and stuff like that. So they could have handled the weird sexiness better, in my opinion. The organization, when it comes to the information and presentation of the theme and the rules, well, it's well organized and It's fairly easy to understand everything about the content. So in quality, you could say this is a good quality PDF, but I definitely would have taken a different direction with the art. Now let's talk about the contents. Well, I'm not really satisfied with this supplement. Well, first you have a small introduction, just telling you how to use this supplement, but then the things that I do not like begin. They start talking about gender, and it says, as a general rule, gender inequality doesn't occur in the ninth world. Okay, so in the Lovecraftian supplement, in Strange Aeons, they told us that in the ninth world there is no racism. And now they are telling us there is no gender inequality. It's just absurd. The setting is losing all its believability, all its credibility, all its realism. As a setting, it makes no sense at all. Every time you try to remove issues or problems from a campaign world or a setting, you are taking away opportunities for the players to solve problems. What is somewhat disturbing to me is that they don't even give you the possibility. They don't tell you something like, you can handle the ninth world however you like. If you want racism or sexism or whatever, or gender discrimination, you can place that right here. You can create the type of world that you want, but they're kind of like very adamant, like, oh, in the ninth world there is no racism. In the ninth world there is no gender inequality and gender discrimination. And you get this theme throughout the entire supplement. This is a fairly short supplement, just 14 pages, but you have that feeling that they try to create some sort of safe space in the campaign world, and I don't like it at all. It's unnecessary, and I think it makes this campaign setting, it's like it's tripping on its own feet. So it's really, it's not a good thing for the ninth world. And then you get some ideas that some ways in which gender could be, the gender roles could have been affected related to certain plagues or some sort of strange phenomena. But I think they could have gone a bit more wild because, for example, what if there was some sort of radiation coming from the ground that simply removed gender from everybody? That would be quite scary. Imagine maybe it's like an entire city filled with like gray people or some without sexual organs, and they are just walking around kind of like robots or something. That could have been quite scary. But here are the options that they present you. While they are decent in terms of weirdness, I think they could have been a lot more weird and more appropriate for the ninth world. And then you have some details on class. For example, although many regions in the ninth world have their own class system, slaves play perhaps the clearest class-based sexual role. So they talk to you about how slaves are usually used for sexual reasons, and they talk about sexual orientation, and here it gets somewhat nonsensical in the terms that I was talking about, that couples of all genders, sizes, and sexual orientations are common. Okay. Although couples are sometimes lambasted for their choice of partners, such criticism is more likely to result from a personal dislike, a bit of jealousy, class issues, or some reason other than gender. So again, they're kind of like, no, there are no gender problems or gender issues in the ninth world. It's like an obsession. So again, it takes a lot of the credibility away from the game, from the Numenera, from the ninth world setting. And then they have more details on attraction, about coupledom, how some things that we would consider standard in real life don't apply to the fiction of Numenera. Again, it feels a bit too lukewarm in terms of weirdness. And then they talk about lust and sex and the type of relationships. For example, it says, in most places, selling one's sexual self or skills is neither illegal nor immoral. In fact, in some cases, it's considered to be a smart business move or a job with a great deal of respect and intrinsic value. And this is something, well, I guess it could be handled like that, but I also saw like a tendency in this document that it says something like, in the ninth world, there aren't really like a predominant presence of females in prostitution. So well, in my understanding, or at least when I checked that statistic like 3 years ago, there were more female prostitutes than male prostitutes. So it seems like a bit strange that in Numenera is not like that, because sometimes I don't know, it's very ancient, that sense of performing some sexual services for money. But here again, they're trying like to deny that. I don't know why. And it says here, things that we today consider to be taboos, such as pedophilia, necrophilia, bestiality, and the like, are not necessarily so in every corner of the ninth world. So for example, it says here that in the ninth world there are going to be maybe towns or cities or whatever with people having sexual relations with corpses, and sleeping around with beasts and animals. So wouldn't that be a sort of like a racism, like a rejection of the human race if you start sleeping, having sex with animals? So it contradicts itself a lot. It's really, they really dropped the ball on this one, in my opinion, with this one. And then you have a section, putting sex in your game, a guide for game masters. Now I think that this section could be of use for someone who has never used sex and romance in a role-playing game, perhaps even has been a bit prudish in his role-playing experiences. And it also provides a bit more flavor to the ninth world, like sex and sensuality as ritual and worship, the power of strong love and good sex, sex as stress relief or money maker. So you have details that intertwine with the theme and some of the rules of Numenera. That is, you will get some mechanical details on how to integrate this with the setting. You also have some details on sexually transmitted diseases. And then you have hard stuff, sex tips for game masters. And you have like a lot of ways to tiptoe around sensitive issues when you are running an adventure or a campaign, of course. And then how sex is a hot button for many people. Careful with the level of explicitness. And again, there's something somewhat disturbing here, where it says, when a game involves sex, it can bring out the worst in players who have misogynistic, homophobic, or sexual issues. Well, first of all, this seems like it only applies to straight males. So that's kind of weird. And it's funny because I play with mixed groups, with men and women, and I even almost never had problems with that. The only weird issue, and it wasn't that much of a big, it wasn't a big deal, it was more like a funny situation, was when with a lady, a doctor. I mentioned this in one of my videos, that I kind of suspected some of the other players thought about that too, but it seemed like she had a crush on one of the male players, and she was constantly moving around miniatures. We were playing Pathfinder, and she kept moving around the miniatures. And as you know, in Pathfinder, the location, the place where your miniature is at is very important because of the area of effect attacks, the attacks of opportunity and such. And out of her turn and disrupting gameplay, she just kept moving the miniatures around, trying to get the attention of the guy she was attracted to. And we kept telling her like, oh, stop doing that. She just kept doing it. It got so bad, but at the same time funny, to the point that I was actually, as I was the game master, I was putting the miniatures back into their place without even asking her. Like, it was somewhat of a difficult game to run because of that. So here it says like, oh, be careful, all those misogynists and homophobic people and people with sexual issues are going to ruin your game. So it feels like an exaggeration and somewhat biased, in my opinion. And then you have details on love and courtship and ceremonies. And those ceremonies and courtship are quite different from what you would expect of a more normal setting. So for example, maybe you need to kill a terrifying alien-looking monster and takes some fangs or claws and present them to the one you love, and so it deals with that type of themes. And I think this is one of the best sections of the supplement, with all those details on courting ceremonies. You have more details on sex for sale. Again, it's somewhat strange that they're like, no, 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 there are female prostitutes and male prostitutes are equal. They are the same. They are the same. There are the same number of people selling their bodies for, and so it kind of makes too much emphasis on that. So it's kind of weird. They should give more freedom as to how you are going to customize the ninth world, because obviously you are going to play the ninth world as you like to play it, but it's kind of like they want to push their own version of the ninth world, a version that was not so presented as adamantly in the core rule book. So it's really weird. And then you have that detail on the Aeon priests and sex. And they say, oh, remember that in Numenera you have a pope? Well, this pope is not like the Catholic pope, so don't worry, nobody's going to try to control sexuality and love here. Well, first of all, if you have that attitude, why did you even put a pope in the ninth world in the first place? They could have gone in so many different directions, and because Numenera is a science fantasy setting, and the way it is handled, they could have added so many different things and forgotten completely about religion and religious titles and ranks. So I don't even know why they added a pope in the first place. And well, to be fair, the Catholicism is not the only religion that tries to control sexuality and love. So it's kind of strange. Again, there's like a lot of bias in this supplement. You have more details on health, as I was telling you, sexually transmitted diseases, conception, pregnancy, and childbirth. And now this conception, pregnancy, and childbirth reminds me of an issue that happened at RPG.net like quite some years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when there was this feminist that got upset because of the name of that monster. What is the Nivovian wife, which is basically kind of like a construct with the shape of a woman, and she seduces men and gets pregnant, and the child that she produces is kind of like bent on killing his own father. And there was this huge riot like, Monte Cook, you hate the women because you created this evil monster. So I get the feeling that in this supplement, maybe they felt a bit like they were going to get a bit of a backlash if they handle things to the dislike of some groups. So I think that's something that damaged this document a bit in content, and I think that was something that also damaged in Strange Aeons, the Lovecraftian supplement, where they said like that Lovecraft is a terrible racist, that there is no racism in the ninth world. So if you want to see my review of that supplement, I'm going to put a link in the description below. So again, I think that it's like the content was contaminated by some ideas. Because if you're going to handle it like that, well, then vampires are also, oh no, that's against man, because vampires represent rich, cultured men that want to suck the blood out of women. So please, let's not take it there. That's ridiculous. So, and then you have details on why non-traditional sex and gender roles, how they work in ninth world. They really, on the positive side, they really want you to understand the cultural aspects of sex and sexual roles in the ninth world. But as I was telling you, I feel like that the way it was presented was somehow contaminated by trying to be politically correct. And then you have Numenera artifacts and ciphers, and these are quite nice actually. You have things such as impulse color, which is basically like a color that shows how you are feeling in emotionally. And then you have a seated lift, which is kind of like a floating seat, and you have a smoke helm, which allows you to through a smoke to make someone else feel like you. So it's kind of like a very intimate experience. So these are artifacts with complete rules and that serve for many seduction type situations and romantic encounters. And you have ciphers such as the blood boiler, body enhancer, pleasure center, sexual alteration device, which is kind of like that belt in Dungeons and Dragons that changes your gender, but this also has some other details and ways in which it works. And then you have details on oddity, so you can customize your own artifacts and ciphers. So for example, you have a long soft rope that unties itself with a verbal command. So it's kind of like a safe word situation that's quite kinky. And then you have clip-on earring that emits a soft croon when exposed to moonlight, or strong glass sphere that vibrates at random intervals and frequencies. I think you can imagine how that works, right? And that's all of the content of this supplement. Now let me tell you what I think of this supplement. I am somewhat disappointed, and I think they could have taken things to a whole new level of weirdness. Numenera the ninth world is a weird place, and they could have taken it a lot better, handled it a lot better, and gone a bit farther in terms of weirdness, because there were so much opportunities. For example, they could have created like a sort of like a competition between, maybe it's a group of women, and there's this very studly guy. Maybe he reached the level of mental and physical fitness beyond measure, and he kind of like releases a ball of sperm in an anti-gravity chamber, or maybe he drank something that makes his sperm float, and maybe it could be like a free-for-all competition to see who captures the semen. There are so many ways in which they could have handled this more freely and weird and strange, that I kind of feel like they held back, and all that bias that, oh yeah, equality, and again, it feels like there is no racism here. There is no inequality between men and women, and there are male and female prostitutes all around, and there is no gender discrimination, but there's necrophilia and zoophilia and bestiality. So it feels like it falls apart a lot. I think I could only recommend this to someone who has never ever played added sex or romance to a role-playing game session, and someone who runs games at conventions, because this contains a lot of tips on tiptoeing and acting all carefully and when interacting with others. So in a convention it's going to be somewhat risky to introduce sex and romance, but if you want to handle it like that, then you get a lot of tips on, you have to be aware that many people are scared of sex, or a lot of people have different sexual preferences and all that. Maybe that could be useful. This could also be useful for someone who is a bit prudish, but that at the same time that player could get turned off by the mention of pedophilia, necrophilia, and bestiality and the like. But maybe this supplement could also be of use for someone who is interested in the ciphers and artifacts, which they're quite good in the context of trying to seduce someone and sharing an intimate moment. But if so, I would recommend that you get this at like when it's on sale, because I actually didn't like this supplement too much. It just felt so biased, and when it could have gone wild and weird, it felt like they held back a bit. Well, that's my take on it. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.